You got musicals, holiday classics on ice, and brilliant dance numbers, but remember, they won't be around for long, like Joffrey Ballet's The Nutcracker by two-time Tony Award-winning choreographer Christopher Wheeldon. The 1893 Chicago World's Fair is brought to life on the Lyric Opera House stage, set to Tchaikovsky's legendary score. Critics call it pure joy, heartwarming, and show-stopping, and it's running now through the 28th. And I got a little tip for you. Use promo code SNOW10 to save 10% off tickets for the December 26th and 27th performances. There are a couple of restrictions that apply. The offer excludes price level 6 and previously purchased tickets. See the Nutcracker and visit joffrey.org to grab your tickets. Today on CityCast Chicago, the city finally passed a $17 billion budget. So what's in it? Plus, we discuss another city department head resigning, CPD's abysmal consent decree progress, and one particularly photogenic river otter. Joining me to break it all down, WTTW's Heather Sharon and Chicago Reader's Katie Prout. It's Friday, December 20th. I'm Jacoby Cochran, and this is what Chicago's talking about. Morning, Katie. Welcome back to the podcast.
Good morning. Glad to be here.
Morning, Heather. Great to have you back as well.
I'm delighted to be here.
Welcome to everybody listening. If you're a regular around these parts, happy to have you back. And if you're new, we're happy to have you here. This week on CityCast Chicago, we gave you a survival guide to winter in the go on Monday. We talked about a controversial metal shredder in Pilsen on Tuesday. On Wednesday, we ran a classic bracket looking at some of the most viral moments of 2024. And on Thursday, thanks to executive producer Simone Ali said, we took the hardest Chicago food quiz I have ever seen in my life. Go back and listen to those episodes if you haven't. And if you have, go back and share your favorite one with all of your people. Of course, because it's Friday, we're bringing in our friends to discuss some of the biggest stories happening in the city this week. But before we get into it, my hope is that most of us listening today have some semblance of a holiday break. I don't know about y'all. I need some days off. And I hope our guests today are getting some semblance of a break as well. Heather, I'm going to start with you. What is something you're looking forward to over the like sort of super holiday we got over the next week and a half?
Well, one of my, I don't really believe in guilty pleasures, but it probably qualifies as a guilty pleasure, is that I love television police procedurals. There is something about the notion.
No, not the propaganda show.
Yeah. So I know that this is problematic. I 100% get it. But there's just something I find very soothing about, 40 minutes, you're going to find out who did it. There's going to be some semblance of justice and order restored, and all nearly 500 episodes of Law and Order are now on Hulu. So that is my winter break sorted. Am I entirely proud of it? I am not. But you know what? The heart wants what the heart wants.
That feels like, in some ways, a classic Chicago reporter answer, because you are looking for something with some semblance of order and predictability from episode to episode, because in your world at City Hall, that's the farthest thing from you.
Is correct.
That is not what you're getting every week. Katie, what's something you're looking forward to this holiday season?
I really like what Heather said about not believing in guilty pleasure, that all pleasure is pleasure and we deserve it. I'm really looking forward to going to see my family and my sister. All my family now lives in Michigan. And this year for the holidays, my sister is hosting Christmas at her house, because when you live in rural northern Michigan, you can afford a house. A little bit of a drive to get up there. It's like a good 6 hours, but I'm really looking forward to spending that time. And then, in terms of I also just want to turn my brain off for a bit and do some watching of TV. And I'm watching Buffy for the first time. Thank you so much for that response.
I am so excited for you.
When I woke up and TV was still on, that was the TV show that was on every morning of my childhood.
I'm just lately, it's been a tough couple months with politics and personal, all kinds of things. things, and I just let Buffy babysit me.
Oh my God, I love it. Now I want to know, to all of the people listening, what are y'all watching? Because it seems like a lot of people are going to be sitting on the couch watching TV. 773-780-0246. Leave us a text or a voicemail. We want to know what you're watching over the holidays. One big news story we are watching tonight. The Chicago Board of Education has a special meeting on the books to consider ousting CPS CEO Pedro Martinez. Yes, Friday night before a holiday break. They really doing this, y'all. We've been talking about the tension between Martinez and the mayor's office for months now, and it looks like they might actually let him go, even if it'll cost taxpayers. If that happens, we'll have the latest in your inbox tonight, but you have to make sure you're signed up for the Hey Chicago newsletter. Do it at chicago.citycast.fm. After months of contentious council meetings, new budget proposals, and a few delayed votes, alders voted 27-23 on a $17 billion budget. Heather, given all the combativeness, some compromise along the way, it seems, what did we end up in our city budget? Let's start with the highlights.
Well, of course, the big news is that Chicago property owners will not pay more in property tax in 2025 to sort of help the city make their ends meet. And regardless of where you are on the political spectrum on the city council, all of the alder people agreed that this was a really tough budget. It closed a $982 million budget gap caused by essentially three things. One, the COVID-19 relief funding from the federal government that had sort of kept the city afloat during the pandemic is now exhausted. Two, the city's pension bills are enormous. In all, the city will pay nearly $3 billion of that $17 billion into the city's four pension funds, which remain woefully underfunded and in not great shape. And then, of course, there's just the rising cost of running city government. We've all lived through this inflationary period, which means that everything costs more. And that means that it costs more for the city to provide basic services. And that is why things are especially out of whack this year. But let's be clear, the city's finances have been long out of whack, and they remain so under this new budget with really hard decisions coming up.
Something that I was watching was progressive alders saying, "What are you doing?" To Johnson and to his office. We're confused about your leadership. We're confused about your communication style. You say you want to be transparent, but that's not what we're experiencing. Opposition didn't fall into neat lines of more conservative versus more progressive or along racial lines, right? That there was this more discontent across the board. And I know that, Chicago's favorite pastime, and I certainly include myself in that, can be dunking on and or hating whichever mayor is in office. You run for that position and it is, pin the tail on the donkey, but you ran for it and you're in that spot. But just watching the spectacle of it and kind of communication fumbles from Johnson's office, not even as a reporter, but just as a Chicagoan, it left me with a lot of questions.
Yeah, Heather, let's dive a little bit deeper. Without the originally proposed $300 million property tax levy, we had to find some other ways. What tax hikes can Chicagoans expect that were used to fill this $1 billion budget hole?
Well, the removal of the $300 million property tax hike meant that the city had to come up with, I know this is hard math, $300 million to make up for it. So the way they did it was to basically take about $128 million right off the top by raising taxes by 2% on digital subscriptions. And these are taxes that are largely paid by large corporations like Google, Salesforce, people who sort of rent server space. That's what this tax is on. And so that was non-controversial because not very many people on the city council agree on a whole lot. However, there is a significant majority on the city council that believes that the city's sort of tax burden is too heavy on working class and middle class Chicagoans and too light on giant corporations. So that, sort of took over a big chunk. But the remaining chunk was really hard to sort of get through. And there is a combination of things that people will fill starting on January 1st. One, it's going to cost us more to stream those Law and Order reruns and those Buffy shows, because it's going to cost about 1.25% more to subscribe to Netflix and Hulu and sort of pay your cable TV bill. Also, it's going to cost more if you go to the store and you don't have your own tote bag. So right now, we all pay 7 cents per plastic or paper bag when we go to the grocery store or Walgreens or wherever. Starting January 1st, it's going to cost 10 cents per bag. But there are also a ton of little fees involved that the city is going to start hitting people with. Like, it's going to cost more to get a zoned parking pass if you live in part of the city where you can only park on your street if you're a resident. Also, it's going to cost potentially more if you speed, because the city is going to put in a bunch more speed cameras to catch people going more than 36 miles an hour. So that will also hit people who, if they're not watching their speed closely enough. And I think there's an argument to be had about whether the property tax, which of course falls hardest on the people who own the most expensive property, whether this budget isn't balanced on the basis of more regressive taxes than progressive taxes. And I think that Mayor Johnson is going to face a lot of questions about that, because of course he ran for office promising to sort of protect working class Chicagoans and protect middle class Chicagoans. I think there are, as I said before, a lot of questions about sort of what this means for the city's financial condition going forward, because none of these issues are going away. And this budget, while it sort of is balanced, it doesn't sort of fundamentally address that sort of imbalance in the city's revenues and the expenses.
I mean, will Chicagoans feel a reduction in services or projects? I'm thinking snow plowing initiatives, guaranteed income, youth employment, affordable housing, mental health services.
Yeah, that stuff is the kind of stuff that stresses me out, or is in my reporting and in my interest is kind of keeping me up. There's personal interest in there too, right? Like, one of my brothers is disabled and uses a wheelchair, and getting, or when he comes and visits, this is not a city that is very accessible to people who are using wheelchairs, right? Like, whether it's the CTA or the sidewalks. And so cutting these programs, whether you're diminishing them, I know that the initiative to plow the sidewalks is going to $500,000, and we're going to come up with the funding elsewhere. It just kind of seems like it's saying who is important and who isn't. The guaranteed basic income pilot cut, right? That makes real tangible difference in lives of people across the city. And we have right now, I don't know if this is a good time to pivot into this or not, but over the last year, we have seen the mayor's office and DFSS, the Department of Family and Support Services, close tent campments. But if we're also going to be reducing support for people to pay their rent in the form of this universal basic income, it's $500 per person or family. I can't remember which. And that can be the difference for people between are they getting medical care or not? Can they keep their home or not? While we're also trying to transition to this system, this initiative for all housing support and new arrival support to go through one streamlined place, I just have a lot of questions about how successful that's going to be. And by successful, I mean, how many people are going to have a place? Are we going to see an increase in homelessness next year if people are getting their tents closed right now?
You mentioned Brandy Canazzi, who stepped down as DFSS commissioner. And she's really been at the forefront of leading services for not only unhoused Chicagoans, but new arrivals and finding resources for them. I want to start kind of connecting this to the budget. Heather, how did some of those initiatives like the Unified Shelter Service fare in this budget, affordable housing initiatives?
Well, there's certainly money for homelessness services. And in all, the city is going to spend about 20% more next year than it did on helping the unhoused than it did this year. But it's a really complicated picture because a lot of that money is coming directly from grants and other agencies. It's not necessarily directly coming from Chicago taxpayers. The other thing is that we are entering a whole new era of homelessness services in Chicago, and nobody is quite sure sort of how that unified shelter system is going to work. The number of people living in the city's migrant shelters is about 2,500 people. That is the lowest it has been since really 2022 or early 2023. So what the city is going to do is that they are going to close the quote unquote migrant shelters and open one system that will have about 6,800 beds. Now, right now, the city, and for many years, has had about 3,000 shelter beds for longtime Chicagoans who experience homelessness. That's not going to change. The extra beds are going to be funded through a combination of federal and state grants that are designed to help the people still in the shelters who, came here as sort of part of this migrant crisis. Right now, that means that there would be about, give or take about 500 empty beds in this system, which I think is going to be a big relief for people who work in this area, because when this new unified shelter system was announced, it looked like maybe there would be as many as 2,000 people who would be evicted and wouldn't have a shelter bed. So I think that's a big relief, and that's a bright spot heading into the new year. The real question is what does that look like? And beyond the shelter system is what happens when the aid sort of that helped house the migrants that moved out of the shelters in the last 6 months or a year. What happens when that rent sort of help ends? Can they transition to sort of being self-sufficient? Because there's no money left. The city doesn't have any money, the state doesn't have any money, and we're about to see the start of the second Trump administration. So there is going to be no federal assistance. So I'm going to be looking for, are we seeing a wave of evictions as that rental assistance expires? Are we going to see people sort of being unable to stay housed as they reach the point of not having a work permit and sort of not being able to sort of cobble together, under the table jobs to keep themselves and their family housed?
And we also have the Trump administration talking about making a specific example of Chicago, right, as a sanctuary city, as a place where undocumented people live. And we also kind of, for some more federal context and background, this year, the Supreme Court decided this decision in a court case called Grants Pass versus Johnson, that essentially it criminalizes being homeless. It allows, through these quote unquote camping bans, for people who are sleeping outdoors in tents and sleeping bags on a bench, you name it, to be arrested, to be fined. So you're getting penalized for being homeless, even if there's no other place for you to go, whether or not that city has a shelter option for you or that shelter is safe. And we're starting to see in the state of Illinois, cities like Peoria, there's other cities that are enacting these laws that are criminalizing homelessness, criminalizing sleeping outside. As we're transitioning to this shelter system, are we going to make sure everyone doesn't fall through the cracks? As Commissioner Kanazi is leaving, who's going to fill that space? And as, again, with the Johnson administration doing these tent encampment closures, essentially evictions, and then putting up fences where people can no longer sleep, it's not putting those laws on the books, those camping bans on the books, specifically, right? But it is this soft way of making that happen. How
significant is Commissioner Kanazi's departure at this moment, Katie?
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough job. You're dealing with a constant revenue change revenue stream change is unpredictable, right? Like we don't have Bring Chicago Home. We don't have a dedicated revenue stream for homelessness services in this city. And so you're constantly having to scramble for grants or think of, in like 3 and 4 year increments as opposed to 10 and 20. And that's where like the real change and the real safety for people comes. Kinazi, and that sometimes story includes a quote with her talking very proudly of the work that she's done. She's been able to look in people's eyes and they're still alive. And like respectfully, there's also a lot of people that have died in whether like the young boy in the migrant shelter. Someone died outside of 10 South Kedzie last year. Someone I know died in November who lived on Lower Wacker. Every year there's like a memorial for people that are unhoused. And it's easy sometimes to be quick to criticism in reporting too. But like, I hope that with her legacy that people do take time with it and let it be nuanced because both things can be true at once. And that's the only way that we can like continue to improve as a city, I think.
In the midst of this budget fight, Heather, recent report shows that within Mayor Johnson's budget, there's about $170 million for what are being called ghost cops, positions that won't likely be filled in 2025. And yet when Mayor Johnson moved on the police budget at any point during these last 2 months, it was going to be to cut positions inside of constitutional policing. You've been reporting on where CPD is in regards to their consent decree. Can we talk about how this budget may have revealed like Johnson's relationship to not only the efforts to fund constitutional policing, but to get CPD to ultimately be in line with this federal mandated consent decree?
I spent a great deal of time this year working with our friends over at ProPublica to do a deep dive into sort of the first 5.5 years of the consent decree. The long and the short of it is that the city has only complied with 9% of it fully. And because it has taken so long, there are a lot of people who are really losing faith that this is a process that will get CPD to a reform place. And what we're talking about here is ensuring that the Chicago police constitutionally and no longer routinely violate the constitutional rights of Black and Latino Chicagoans. And right now, we have a police department who, according to a federal judge, is making quote unquote unsatisfying progress towards that goal. And the mayor's initial budget proposal slashed 162 positions from the police department that were vacant, but were charged with implementing that consent decree. And it got widely condemned by the monitoring team that is charged with making sure that the city is living up to that binding federal court agreement. The attorney general threatened to essentially ask the federal judge to sanction the city if it went ahead with these cuts. And in the face of really implacable opposition on the city council, particularly from progressive older people who should be aligned with the mayor, he restored those cuts. So in all, that means that in a year where the city faced a $300 million property tax hike that was rejected, the city will earmark more than $200 million for these reform efforts. So I think that is a really clear example of just how costly these reforms are and just how slow the progress has been.
On top of, how much money did we spend in paying out lawsuits and settlements last year? And maybe you can give us an estimate of how much money we may spend this year?
Well, it's really impossible to tell at this moment, but it is going to be at least $100 million out the door immediately. And it could be more than double that simply because of one lawsuit that went to a jury trial and came back with a verdict. A 10-year-old girl was killed as a result of a police chase back in 2020. And her family sued the city saying that the police chase was improper, and the jury agreed with them and awarded her family nearly $80 million. Now, the city actually budgets for police misconduct settlements. They know that they are going to have to pay these settlements, and they put aside every year $82 million to pay those settlements, which means that this one case would wipe out the city's nearly entire budget. So that tells you how costly these issues are, not to mention the fact that you have a family who has essentially been destroyed with the death of their 10-year-old daughter. And, so when the federal judge said during a hearing that she found the progress unsatisfying, I really perked up my ears. And I asked Mayor Johnson about what he thought about the judge saying that the progress was unsatisfying, because, of course, it raised the specter that if the city doesn't sort of move faster, that they could be in a lot of jeopardy. And, he responded in a way that was really interesting to me. He said that the entire consent decree process is quote unquote cumbersome. And he's not wrong. It's a complicated Byzantine agreement where you have to reach preliminary compliance and then secondary compliance and then full compliance. And every agreement has to be sort of signed off on, not just the city, but, the city's lawyers, the police department, the mayor's office, and of course, a coalition of reform groups that forced the city into the consent decree all the way back after the 2017 Department of Justice investigation. But I think the question that is really going to confront the mayor in 2025, as if he didn't have enough on his plate already, is what he can do, if anything, to sort of speed up this process. And if that's not possible, or he doesn't, will the city find itself in the crosshairs of a federal judge who, I imagine, if she's annoyed now, will be more annoyed in 3 months, 6 months, and 9 months.
It's always a hard transition when you spend 40 minutes.
That's what you get for having me back.
Diving neck deep into the Chicago budget season. But every episode ends the same way, and that's with some good news. Katie, let's start with you. What is some good news you want to leave CityCast Chicago with today?
So this weekend is my spouse's birthday. He has a birthday that usually growing up would fall, describe it as like an airport birthday, right? It's like in between the holidays, in between often like Hanukkah and Christmas, spending it traveling. And when we started dating like 8 years ago or whatever, I started taking him on his birthday on these like surprise adventures around the city, right? Like, try to find like something like free or like a city resource, whether it was a museum or a park, somewhere to go out to dinner, maybe some kind of show, something fun just to like kind of like pick 2 or 3 different neighborhoods too, to kind of get a sight, like see the whole city. And he loves it. So this weekend is his birthday adventure. On Saturday, I won't spoil it because this will come up before then what we're going to do, but we're going to go to a few different places throughout the city. Yeah, it's fun. And it's fun for me too, to see him happy like that. And also like, I love Chicago.
I love that good news. I love that each year the expectation has grown like right alongside I'm not going to call it dread, but for you, I know it's pressure maybe.
No, he's like, oh boy, what are we doing this year? I can't wait. What should I wear? Like, it's just like, oh man, like, usually he wants to like sleep in. If he can, he's much more of like a late night owl than I am, but he'll be right awake. Like, oh.
Where are we going? Where are we going? Where are we going? What are we doing? I love this problem you've created for yourself. It's so beautiful.
Fully.
It's so beautiful. Heather, what about you? What is your good news for us today?
Well, I always come with something animal related to prove to you and the greater Chicago listening public that my heart is in fact not dead and that I can in fact feel joy for the critters that surround us. And again, I am here to report a conservation achievement. So apparently river otters were hunted to near extinction in the Midwest by the late 1980s. But they have been trying to reintroduce them to the Des Plaines River. And for the first time in 15 years, one of those like conservation cams that monitor the river caught a picture of a river otter, making it clear that the species has sort of reestablished itself in what was once its natural habitat. And it's stuff like that that makes my heart feel warmth and perhaps grow not 3 sizes bigger, but just 1 size bigger. But that is really good news about the health of the rivers and sort of Chicago's entire ecosystem.
I love going on conservation kayaking in the river, and they talking about just the efforts to bring back sustainable places for these species to thrive. I feel like we didn't get as many like new Chicago animal stories to obsess over in 2024. And so maybe this is also some good news forecasted for 2025 that we get a little otter family to name, like the little foxes in Millennium Park.
What if there's like otter babies in the spring, you know?
Come on.
That'd be so cute.
That'd be delightful, right?
Rounding out our good news, I want to talk about Garfield Park's plant sale that's happening tomorrow and Sunday from 10 to, I believe, 2, as long as supplies last. This goes along with some news I gave last Friday where I visited Planks and Pistols, their new flower shop inside of Drip Collective, a coffee shop in West Loop. And I just feel like at this time where it's still getting dark super early, you don't got a lot of like real vegetation or color outside. You know, we've been getting some plants from Facebook Marketplace in the last couple of months. Last week, I went to my friend's house in Oak Lawn, and she's been growing a lot of plants. She gave us a spider plant. We got some lavender. I went and joined I think it's the Pistol Club. And so like every week they put out a new arrangement, and you just got to bring your glass back into the coffee shop, pay a little money, and they'll just drop a new arrangement in your case over at Planks and Pistols. And then if you want, you can go out to Garfield Park and add a few more plants to your collection. I don't know. I just think it's nice to see a little bit of color inside, nurture some plants inside. Katie, Heather, I really appreciate both of y'all making time for us today, joining us on CityCast Chicago, our last news roundup of the year. It means a lot to us.
I'm glad to be here.
It was so fun, as always.
That's all for us here on CityCast Chicago. So I got to thank everybody who helps make this whole show possible. Our executive producer is Simone Aliseya. Our producer is Michelle Navarro. Our Hey Chicago newsletter senior editor is Sydney Madden. Our roving producer this week is Elizabeth Kama. The music we all love is from the homie Sam Thousand, All the Kimonos, and Mark Greenberg from the Mayfair Workshop. We're going to be taking a little break between now and the new year, but we got a few of our favorite episodes lined up to keep your feeds warm, including one on self-care that I think we all need this holiday season. We'll be back with your guide to January on the 2nd. Hey, I appreciate every single person who has joined the podcast journey this year. People who have been riding us for the last few years. 2024 was busy. We're going to be back in the new year. In the meantime, in between time during this holiday season, consider signing up to become a member by visiting membership.citycast.fm. All right, that's my last spiel. Talk to you soon. Peace.
One of the greatest joys for me in the last couple of months has been watching Buffy from the beginning with my 15-year-old daughter. And it's been a lot of fun to sort of see her experience the plot twists and everything. But it's also been just honestly a joy to watch her be like, hello, but Xander is terrible, Mom.
Oh, he's the worst.
What is happening here?
Yeah, don't get me started. I know we're here to talk about the news, but I could fully go into the ways in which I wish Xander. I'm like, are you sure he's not going to die in this episode? Are you sure he's not going to die in this season? So, yeah.
Okay, so what needs to happen now is that there's an emergency episode of CityCast Chicago where we talk about all of our Buffy thoughts. Please make that happen. Let's forget about the budget. Nothing needs to happen except for that.